once we'll have a interactive session on resilience. This has been our theme for the last few months now since the COVID crisis struck. We will, as usual, we will talk about, have a question and answer session for about 45 minutes, leaving the time open for questions from the group. As always, keep sending things on the chat, whatever questions come your mind. And then we will end with a chapter update, which I don't think will take more than 15 to 20 minutes. And Pradeep, you're welcome to stay on for the chapter update as well. It would be great if you could stay on. So thanks, everybody. Without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker for the day. I'm going to so Pradeep Nair is the director of the Ford Foundation, serving India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. He spent the first part of his career primarily in Silicon Valley, working at Deloitte, and then moved to New York, got an opportunity to work with President Clinton's advisory, where he led India-focused work. He joined Paul Volcker's mission, leading his new startup, addressing governance and implementation challenges in financial sectors. He presently leads Ford Foundation in India and the region, and has been actively involved in institutional buildings, where they have been actively involved in institution building since the 1950s. And this was something, so Pradeep and I had a pre-call earlier, where he talked a lot about how the Ford Foundation started, and there were a lot of learnings for me as well. So what we will do, Pradeep, is maybe give you 5 minutes to give 5 to 7 minutes to give an intro on the Ford Foundation and what it does, etc. And once that happens, I can lead with questions which might be of interest to members. So over to you. Let's go.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'll ask everybody else to mute themselves, please.
Yes, thanks, Dogan. And good morning to everyone. I'm speaking here from Delhi. I don't know where the rest of you are. I'm assuming everyone's in Bangalore. I work for the Ford Foundation, like Jogan said, and just to give you a brief background on Ford Foundation, for those of you who don't know of our work here in the region, Ford Foundation has been in India since 1952, which makes us technically the oldest international private foundation in India. And in 1952, we were asked to come here. So India, 5 years after independence, was asked to come here by Prime Minister Nehru, because he wanted help in starting the economy and especially the agriculture sector. So the first few decades of Ford's work in India was primarily focused on agricultural reforms. And for those of you who know of the sector, things like the Green Revolution were all things that Ford Foundation was part of. Then somewhere in the 70s or 80s, and during those days, Ford Foundation, because of the nature of our job as an implementing organization, was really large. We had I was told about 800, 900 people in the country based out of Delhi, focused primarily on agriculture. Then I think around the 70s or so, we decided that we do not want to be an implementing organization anymore. It was not what Ford was interested in focusing on. And so instead decided to be a donor organization, meaning that an organization that just focused on identifying implementation agencies and then supporting them financially. So that's when we made the transition around 70s or 80s. And what we did for the first few decades as a donor was identify and help start public institutions. So quite a few of the institutions and these initiatives thankfully were successful, including, some people don't know this, but organizations like NCAER and ICRIAR and IAM, the first IAM, and several other a lot of these IRMA and a lot of other universities and institutions were all set up by Ford during those days, just because Ford's belief then was that strong institutions are necessary for a country to build its future on. So that was the strategy for a few decades during those years. And then post that, we decided the strategy that we would like to adopt as a donor agency is to actually focus on programs. And then realizing that there are way too many programs to work on in India. We decided what we would do was every 5 years or so, we would pick a few program areas that we thought was relevant and focus on those program areas. And then once the 5-year cycle was done, we'd pick another set of program areas. And so we've been doing this again for the last 30 years or so. And not surprisingly, we worked on most program areas by now and gone through a cycle already. Anything right from arts and media. For those of you who know, there are several arts organizations in Bengaluru that we've been part of from the start. Climate, gender issues, livelihood, farmers issues, and so on and so forth. The set of issues that we're focused on currently as part of our 5-year cycle, which is just launched end of last year, so December last year, are as following. One is gender. We are very focused on gender issues again in this cycle. And this particular time, what we're focused on is violence against women. That's one of our program areas now. The second issue that we're focused on is farmers' distress. The third that we're focused on is technology and how do we ensure that technology is inclusive. The fourth one that we're focused on is impact investing. And in that, basically what we're trying to do is how do we ensure that the ecosystem for social entrepreneurs and social investors is able to address all the challenges that it faces, whether it's capital, whether it's risk capital, and whether it's incubators or whatever. So impact investing is an area that we are focused on. And the last one that we are focused on, very interestingly, and all this is, mind you, just before the COVID crisis, but the last one that we're focused on since December is actually the future of workers. So not future of work, but the future of workers. And what we were particularly interested was the large number of informal workers in India, which, as many of you know, depending on who is counting, is either 80% or 90% of workers in India are informal, meaning without social security and all of that. And very interestingly, this is something we decided to focus on last year. And it's interesting that during COVID, that's one program that's actually been highlighted a lot, right? Because whether you call them migrant workers or whatever, the underlying issue there is that these are workers without social security benefits, which is why quite a bit of migration is happening in the first place. But these are the big issues that we focus on. We also have a smaller program that's focused on philanthropy, and in that, what we are hoping to do is what can Ford Foundation, organizations like Ford Foundations that have been here for a long time, do in building a strong philanthropy ecosystem in the region, right? So focused on Indian philanthropies and Indian organizations and Indian givers and all of that. So that's also a program area that we're focused on. One underlying theme across all of these is we are not a development organization, right? That's very important to remember. So we're not focusing on development issues. What we are interested in is justice and equality. So in each of these program areas, it's more about the people who are affected by farms distress. It's the people who are affected by violence against them. It's the people who are affected by the future of how work is going to change. In each of these, it's about the people. So it's not about development as such, but it's about the people. So one thing that's always been there for us at the core has been justice and equality. And we're also realizing that in our last program area of philanthropy, as we're trying to introduce more transparency and data, that is something that a lot of Indian philanthropists struggle with, right? How do you really work on programs that at its core have justice and equality? It's easier to work on development issues, meaning that it's easier to go build schools, and it's easier to, I guess, focus on more tangible issues. It's very difficult to focus on things that are not easily measurable or things that take a long time. And two core principles that at least I've adopted. I've been here only for 3 years now since I moved from the US. Two core principles that I've adopted, and hopefully we're hoping that our partner organizations also adopt is, we think the real value of organizations like ours are the ability to take on risks. And I don't mean political risks, but I mean the risks of failures. And the other one is patience, right? So those are two, I think, models that are pretty important for us. And I sincerely believe that's what separates us from private sector and from the government, because we're not foolish to think that we can ever replace either one of them. That's not our goal. The capital that the government can bring in and the innovation that the private sector can bring in cannot be replaced. But what we think that neither one of those sectors necessarily has an appetite for different reasons, is the the willingness to take risk and the willingness to wait it out. I think those are two things that this sector brings in, and that's what we are hoping. So when we look at programs, so during this crisis, as you can imagine, we've been flooded with work, and we've been trying to prioritize what we need to do, whether it's requests from entrepreneurs and private sector to be a part of their funds, and everything. Yeah, like quite a few initiatives in Bengaluru that we've been a part of. The lens through which we decide whether we should be a part of the initiative or not is exactly that. It's like, what is it that we are able to bring in that you cannot do yourselves, and then evaluate that based on that.
This is a very, very different lens than what most people are looking it through. So it's great to hear this. I want to take a little bit of time to drill through some of what you said. It's starting with the most obvious and the most burning question, which is about migrants, and it's been in the news lately. A lot of our partners have been incredibly involved, whether in providing food, whether there is an incredible movement in Bangalore where they're sending migrants back on planes, and this massive touching on. So there is a lot of it has certainly touched a chord. Even though this was a problem that has been here before, somehow it has touched a chord, and sometimes that outrage can be collectively used for a better future, if I may. So, what are your core learnings on this informal workers? The fact that they, within a week of them not having a job, they have to be able. They are so desperate that they would do anything to get back. What's your core learning? Help us, and if you have a solution or two, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think I have a solution, but I can tell you what is it that we've been working on. And like I said, interestingly enough, this is something that we decided to focus on last year, before this event started. So I think, to your point about it's got people interested what's striking is that this is exactly how we decide what issues to work on, right? Because for us, one of the biggest challenges for us every 5 years is to decide which one is more important than the other, because every issue is equally important, right? So how do you decide one is more important? And we do a lot of work, as you can imagine. A lot of our work is spent on deciding what are the 3 or 4 or 5 issues to work on every 5 years, because once we decide on that, we lock them down, and then everything else, unfortunately, we got to say no to, right? Because as funding is it's not easy. People think giving money away is easy. It's not, because there's a lot of due diligence, a lot of process, a lot of accountability, and all of that. So we take this very seriously to decide what is it that we need to focus on, and also to decide how is it that we measure outcome, right? Because also something in this sector that's slightly different from a pure private sector is, like I said, it's the tangibility is different, right? It's not investment returns that you are looking at. These are slightly different kinds of returns, and especially if it's long term, how do you measure that? How do you set short term goals, medium term goals? So to come back to so how we decide what are more important issues to focus on is, we have our own way of deciding what are the galvanizing issues, right? And for us, it's very important to decide what are galvanizing issues. Galvanizing issues for us are issues that are important, but also that we think people somehow rally around, right? And, I think gender is one where we always think gender is the galvanizing issue, because it does get people concerned enough to at least act maybe for a day or two, because sadly, that's all the attention span is for most people. And this migrant, these workers, also, we've always known that it was a crisis waiting to happen, just because of the large amount of informal workers we have in India. And, and I think an easier classification maybe to look at this so that you appreciate the problem is by calling them informal workers rather than migrant workers, because, informal workers, not all informal workers are migrating, but all informal workers are still facing the problem, right? So if you look at migrant workers, unfortunately, you might have a very narrow view and say, because the issue to solve here is not migration, in our opinion. The issue to solve here is what is leading to the migration in the first place, right? Which is the issues that an informal worker faces. And I think for that, we just need to ask ourselves, what makes an informal worker informal? Why are they called informal in the first place as opposed to a formal worker? So it is not the size of the paycheck. It is not the how fancy the office is or whatever that's making that person informal. The informality of the sector is based on certain benefits that that person is entitled to but is not receiving, right? Whereas a formal sector receives it. Whether it's healthcare, whether it's sick leave, whether it's an organized way of working, whether it's social security benefits, all of those, like the list can go on and on. So those are why is that person not receiving those benefits, right? Is what makes that person informal. And for us, we've all, we've been very concerned about that. And I think for us, we are not reacting to this crisis in the same way some others are, because we think that by addressing only the peripheral issues of migrant workers, we're not really solving the core issues. Having said that, we do realize that we do have to address immediate concerns like hunger and poverty and homelessness and all of that these workers are facing. But for us, whether fortunately or unfortunately, that is still a small percent of the work that we're doing. Our bigger work is still on how do we work with these employers, how do we work with the state governments to ensure that these benefits are received, whether it is by state regulations that forces employers to provide these benefits to their employees, whether it is convincing the employers that providing these benefits in the long term helps them also, whether it is helping some of the employees realize what they're entitled to but they may not be receiving. All these, I think for us, there are multi-pronged approach of addressing what we perceive to be core issues of equality and rights that most of them are not having, because you and I or anyone in your family or my family would not compromise and would not settle for a job that does not give us these benefits, right? We would not. I mean, we would just not accept those jobs, and we would think it's very unusual for an employer to hire us and not tell us what our sick leaves are, not tell us what rules around work are. But we seem to be fine with accepting that for everyone else. So I think for us, it's breaking that down and seeing which is why I say this program of future of work for us is actually a very good opportunity to see that if technology really is going to be the defining catalyst for how work changes in the future, then can we actually use that to our advantage, right? Because the technology can be used to kind of level the field, right? Saying that maybe that can address certain issues that employers have been claiming that they would like to do certain things, but they cannot because of so and so reasons. So I guess we give in our approach, we're giving the benefit of doubt to everyone who has the intention and saying maybe what you were struggling with was a lack of this technology, maybe the lack of this capital, all of which we are willing to bring to the table. We're willing to provide that catalyst. We're willing to provide. So to give you some solutions or some things that you said we might be doing. See, again, taking advantage of the fact that we're willing to do risks. We've been providing a lot of risk capital, and these are to really large financing organizations and investors who you would think would not need additional capital. But believe it or not, every single one of them wants risk capital, right? So whether it's like really large organizations, and I don't want to use the names of those entrepreneurs in Bengaluru and other places, they're all really well-known people, but they've put together, or they want to put together some fund, really large funds, in which what they're asking for is, can someone put the first loss capital? And we're saying we're willing to do that. We will come in and put in those couple of $1 million, a couple of million crores, or whatever it is, that then in turn can be used as a collateral and then attracts the commercial investors to, you can use that as a leverage and come in and attract commercial investors to create these large funds. We're willing to do that. So that's one solution that we're doing. And we're doing that a lot across. We've always been doing that. We've been doing that for a lot of decades, actually. One of the largest and the most used agriculture guarantee credit in the country was something that we had created with Rabobank, I think 12 or 15 years ago. I don't know if you all know. Rabobank is a very large lending bank, one of the largest in agriculture, Dutch bank. And 15 years ago, we decided to create a risk guarantee product with them on the same principles of we'll provide a risk collateral and they'll use that to leverage investors. And that has been one of the most used risk guarantee product in the agri sector, right? And so we're doing the same thing now. We're doing that in the so-called gig sector, the e-commerce sector. We're doing that right now with a few of the other investors. We're doing that in the small entrepreneur sector. We're doing that in the women entrepreneur sector. So we're doing quite a few of that, in which we are coming in. We're doing that in the media sector, believe it or not, in the film sector right now, because we also believe that we have a theory of change in which we also think that commercial and feature films that actually focus on positive issues actually are also important to change the narratives in a region, right? So we do a lot of the risk capital. So that's what we're doing in this particular crisis also for a lot of these efforts, rather than just say, here's some money to help in food and this, which we are still doing, but not to the extent of what we're saying. How do we really solve the systematic issues? And I think what we all need to ask ourselves is, how do we solve the systematic issues? And I think there is very few conversations happening right now to address that. And for those of you who've been following this very closely, the exact same thing is playing out in the US now, right? With the racial tensions and all of that, which also not surprisingly, we've been a part of actually investing in issues like incarceration and all, or something that we've been really focusing on in the US. But even in the US, we've not been reacting to what's happening now, because we've always believed that, addressing systematic and ecosystem challenges are something that we are well suited for, because they take time, right? Gender issue, I'd like to quickly touch upon gender issue also. So in gender, the root cause, yes, it's important. What everyone sees and is concerned about is the physical violence, right? Is the physical act of rape and the physical act of molestation and all of that. But what we've been, very interested in is, how do we eliminate root causes of patriarchy and, things that are even more, that leads to the violence in the first place, right? And it's very difficult, right? How do you identify it? How do you create an awareness for it? And how do you fix it? These are three different things. But for us, that's been at our core, is how do you address systematic challenges?
This is absolutely fascinating, Pradeep. And I think what I heard from is that a significant part of the solution, if not the entire solution, would be to create formality for the informal worker, which would be a great way to start. And then you could build up on that. But without that formality, we will continue having these cycles. And using tech to create that formality helps. Giving everybody a free pass to create the formality helps, because otherwise there's just, everybody goes into their corner. So this is absolutely fascinating. Tell us a little bit. I know I and you chatted about 2 weeks ago, and we talked about the kind of funding that you do, especially unrestricted funding. So it's one thing to say it's hard to measure, but there's got to be, we're all, measurement friendly. People, we all live and die by metrics and all of that. Unless there is a set of metrics that we can see, it's very hard for us to get comfortable. So give us some insight on how you deal with that contradiction, and give us some insight on how does it help, this whole unrestricted funding business.
Sure. So see, I also come from a world of metrics and data, and I still believe in it, right? Don't get me wrong. It's not either or. It's not that you either do this or do that. I think metrics and data are very important. All my background has been on that, and I do ask all those difficult questions. And my board member till 2 months ago used to be Narayan Murthy, and he's the reason actually I came to India. So at some point I'll tell you my background also, where I was perfectly okay in New York, working, and he's the one who convinced me to come to India for this particular assignment. So I know him, and I work very closely with him. So he's also always asking and reminding us that data is very important, as you can imagine, because he's a big fan of that. So I'm also a big fan of that. So I think so first let me tell you the kinds of way we do funding. So most of our in fact all of our funding, most of it is still grants, and grants basically means 0% debt, right? In other words, it's like you give money, and you don't expect any financial returns, right? You're not expecting any financial returns. But having said that, see, because we're a really large, till a few years ago, we were the largest foundation in the world before Gates came, right? And of course, Gates is way bigger than anyone can hope to be now. But because we've been here for a long time, and because we're a large organization, we have very established processes and systems. So the way that we do due diligence, and I say that, both from having a background of investing myself, plus we also do equity and debt investments now from out of the US. So we have an arm for that. So the due diligence we do for this is no way different from the due diligence we do for that. Absolutely no way. It takes the same amount of time. It takes the same amount of rigor. It's the exact same thing that we do. So due diligence we do now. In fact, in most cases, I realize, because we partner with a lot of VCs, that the due diligence we do is much more than the due diligence that VCs do. Some of the VCs do today, right? Because their due diligence is based on, as you know, a few metrics, but the rest of it is based on faith and hope and all that, right? I mean, and then you're praying to all the gods and hoping that your investment comes back good.
Yeah.
right? And yeah, and I say that, you know, having still currently partnering many of these VCs also, I was the due diligence is very, very important. That's one, right? And then secondly, but it's very interesting because once we do the due diligence and once we identify the implementing organization, we try to actually let them do their magic, right? We strongly believe that our expertise is in finding the expert. And then beyond that, we would like to give them creative freedom to do it the way that we like. Of course, we do some kind of monitoring and checking, but it's important for us to give them that freedom to, you know, do wonderful things. You know, and it has worked well for us in the past. And, you know, the examples I gave you of organizations, um, you know, like the IMs and, you know, all of that is good. But there are also other organizations, you know, which are maybe not as prestigious as IMs, but equally have gone on to do wonderful work. Like, I don't know if you all know organizations like Pradhan and Seva and, you know, all created by Ford, which very few people know, right? All seed funded and started by Ford, including organizations like Grameen. Mohammed Yunus got his first check from Ford Bangladesh. And we didn't tell him what to do. He had an idea. He came and told us, you know, no one believed him back then in 70s. We said, yeah, we don't know what this is, but let's go and do it. Of course, we've had horrible failures also, including in MFIs, you know, which we've been a part of since 70s. MFIs has gone through a lot of avatars, as you know.
Yes.
Fab India is something that Ford started, which very few people don't know. You know, it's right from the start. And Bissell was actually was a Ford Foundation program officer who came to India to work on artisans issues, who then decided he wanted to do something bigger, and then, you know, wanted to go do Fab India. But anyway, so all these experiences, what it has taught us is this creative freedom that we give organizations. One thing that they really need in creative freedom, and this again for those of you who are investors who will appreciate this, is they need to spend money on themselves, right? And what happens is, in a typical VC world, we are fine with that, right? As a VC investor that invests in equity or debt, we don't tell them not to go and sit in a fancy office. We don't tell them don't go and invest in machines. We don't tell them don't hire good employees. In fact, we encourage them to do all that. We tell them build a good team and then build a product also. Continue building on a product. Somehow in this sector, we've realized that people are not comfortable doing that. People tell them, here's the money, but I want you to use all the money only for your program. If your program is feeding children, or if your program is protecting stray dogs, I want you to use this money on those on protecting stray dogs. In fact, I want you to tell me how the money is being used, and I want you to tell me how every particular rupee is used. And we found that that doesn't help in the creative part of it, right? Because these organizations also need that creative flexibility to solve the problems that they've set themselves out for. Because see, having worked in the private sector for so long, I can tell you based on experience that solving some of the problems that these social organizations that can solve are much more harder than, you know, the problems or challenges that e-commerce faces, for example, right? I mean, how hard is it? And I say that because I've been a product development person and technology person and investment person all my life before this. It's not that hard to sell more routers. It's not that hard to create web pages or whatever. You know, yes, it has some challenges, but it's not as hard as someone saying, I want to eradicate polio, or I want to make sure that there's no homelessness, or I want to make, you know, those are incredibly difficult challenges because they have multiple causalities, right? And that's something that I've realized, that most of the issues in the private sector world don't have multiple causalities. Usually they're linear causalities, right? I mean, it's very easy to, very easy to kind of almost draw a flow chart and say, this leads to this and this leads to that. In this sector, it's impossible. I mean, an issue as simple as how do we ensure girls stay in school, right? Something you think as simple as that, right? Oh, it's very easy to make sure that girls stay in school because all you need to do is ensure that schools have toilets, or someone else will say all you require is make sure that the girls have a safe path to go to school, or and you do that, and then you realize it's not that, because it's also ensuring that the families that they belong to value the education that a girl needs to have. And then we find that, well, that is tied to maybe sometimes the economic status of the family and where they're living in. And then you realize everything just leads to something else. It's incredibly difficult. And then you have an organization that's wanting to fix this issue. And then you give them the funding and tell them, you know what, you only spend the money on this, not on yourself. So what happens? Most of these organizations either are unsuccessful, or, you know, they die off at some time, or are doing some work just, you know, that just addresses some peripheral thing. And it just creates some, it doesn't create that creativeness and innovation that we all know that organizations need to solve problems. So what we decided to, we've always been doing this, right? Like I said, we wouldn't have invested in IIM Calcutta, and told them to do what they wanted, unless we believed that they should put the money on themselves, right? And we did that. So we've always believed on spending that, but we realized 4 or 5 years ago that just doing that and not calling it out maybe is not smart. So 4 or 5 years ago, we decided we'll create a separate, we'll give it a name. Sometimes when you give something fancy names, it catches on. So we decided to call it Build. We have something called a Build program. And under Build, we're saying that money will be, that program we will give, and we put a lot of money under Build. Like globally, we put $1 billion in Build. And we said, what we're going to do with the $1 billion is give grants to organizations, but give it to only spend on themselves, not on programs. Okay. Right? And then, so basically we'll give money to you, Jogan, to your organization and say, hey, use this money to spend on yourself. And I don't care what you do it, buy coffee machines, paint your walls blue, go buy some plants, whatever it is, right? We don't care, do that, spend that money on yourself. And then, we're fine with that, right? And we decided to do it 4 or 5 years ago. And we did it and said that one of the goals we will also try to do is try to convince other foundations to do something similar. So we've done that internationally. And in India in the last 2 years, what I've been involved in is to convincing and having conversations with Nandan or Amit Chandran, with all these people who are also in philanthropy now, to explain to them, see, they all have the intention, but they all are not really sure what this means. How do you give money to an organization and ask them to spend it to themselves, on themselves? Because believe it or not, a lot of the organizations themselves are not prepared to spend money on themselves. We've had a challenge in our this new program of finding organizations to spend money on themselves. Sometimes the challenge is that the amount of money we want to give them is much larger than what they're able to handle. So then that becomes an issue. Secondly, sometimes, these organizations are not prepared to spend money on themselves, because for the longest time, they've structured themselves, on a very survival basis, which means they don't have that second tier management. And usually you need that second tier management to do programs like this where you need to spend money on themselves. Or third, if they want to spend money, because sometimes these organizations, when they spend money on themselves, what they're doing is they're going and hiring a strategy consulting organization to help them do strategy. Because believe it or not, most of these organizations don't do strategy because they don't have money to do strategy. But then to do strategy, they realized, and to hire strategy consultants, they realized there aren't too many strategy consultants out there that fit their budget. So it's leading to a lot of other things. So then what we're now doing in parallel is to create an ecosystem of strategy consultants who can in turn go and, because in our strategy consult, and again, I used to be all of this, right? So I have a lot of friends in the sector, but we find that the Deloittes and all that are necessarily not structured to go and help a 10 crore budget organization in Jharkhand that's trying to find, work with tribal women on I don't know, whatever it is. So then the challenge is, how do you find, so anyway, so it's all this, it's like it's one rabbit hole after the other, but it's very interesting. But it's interesting because we're trying to bring other organizations also along in this journey. Some new philanthropists, some existing philanthropists, all who are interested in this, and we are hoping to convert to, because we do think that what we need is more and more of Indian philanthropic organizations doing this in India.
So for an organization like SVP, for example, where we don't have the kind of firepower that Ford Foundation does, but we still go through the grant process. Would you then, one of the things that we have considered is take a specific, put some percentage together, say 20%, so that every grant of ours, 20% of it has to go towards organizational development. We've not put it together, by the way. We're just talking about it right now. But is that something that has worked so far? I mean, how do you create something which ensures intentionally that a certain percentage of each grant goes towards capacity building? Because that is where money is tightest.
Well, honestly, I think only you can answer that question, right? What your appetite is for the way you want to give money. Because for us, it's worked very differently. For us, we've always given X percentage as a line item, on this. We're not at all, we've never ever, asked why. And this is even before these build programs. If someone gives us a proposal and we ask them for budget line items, we've never asked them why this budget line item says X percent of yourself. In fact, we always encourage them to do that, right? Because we believe that their best they're best suited to see how much they can spend on themselves and why they need it, right? So we don't have any X percentage that we think is right or wrong. But what I was referring to was there are some programs in which all the 100% has gone only for that.
Got it.
So I would even say that if you really want to have fun and experiment with this, maybe pick one of a few grantees in which all you do is that, right? And then you're really going out on a limb, right? Then you're really trying out something different. And maybe I don't know, you might have your own criteria for what kind of organizations those are, for what size or whatever. But that might be fun to do also, right? Or it might be, or maybe you pick up some organizations who are service providers to these organizations. Meaning, like I said, if you're trying to create strategy consulting firms that themselves are actually social organizations that are providing strategy to these kind of organizations, maybe you focus on those organizations, and then maybe you help. Maybe your backgrounds and your experiences are most suited for that. So maybe you help create an ecosystem of strategy service providers or like accounting providers. Because see, for these groups of organizations who are doing work in this sector, they need a lot of services that they may or may not be able to afford today. They need accounting services, they need tax services, they need regulatory services, they need strategy services. These are all services that they may or may not be able to afford because of the nature of their work. And that ecosystem of service providers need to be created in India and strengthened in India. And those are things that, and there are some people working on that. There are a lot of lawyers who are working on creating those legal and law, lawyer services and all of that. So maybe that's an area that also that can be, that some of you that you can focus on.
Yes. So,
but I don't know your strengths, so I don't, I wouldn't be able to say.
Yeah, and I think that would bring the venture part of social venture partners if we go out on a limb. But then, how do you measure the success? Give me, give me one example of a capacity building outcome, if you will. I mean, what's the outcome that you would measure it against?
See, capacity building outcomes are longer term goals compared to program related things, right? And for obvious reasons, because in a program, what we would measure, look, for example, I'll give you examples of program first and then go to unrestricted funding. So in program goals, let's take the goal of, let's take the farmers distress, right? Farmers living wages. So in that, we're actually funding organizations like Pradhan and Seva and all. We have very specific outcomes there, which says that at the end of the 2-year or 3-year or 5-year or something, farmers living wages for X percentage of the population would come up by this much percentage or whatever, right? So it's a very strong metrics that kind of say these are the outcomes that are based on farmers, this thing, and we would see that, or they would say create employment for 1,000 families, right? As part of this. Now, whether that would lead to sustainable, this thing, whatever it is, like those are the kind of outcomes that, again, we don't outline the outcome, just to let you know. The people who are doing it come back to us and say, since this is an area that we work in, here's an outcome, and we look at it and say, yes, that sounds good, and then fine, tell us how to do it. Now for these, so let's take the same organization and imagine that we're not giving them a program this thing, but we're giving them a capacity. See, when we're giving them capacity building, also they're still telling us the same thing. So what they're telling us is that our goal is to increase, let's say, farmers' wages for this particular group of people. But what we also want to do right now is spend money on ourselves. And that goal maybe for us will take 5 years, because whereas in the previous program, our money is being directly used for that. And we'll maybe, I'm just exaggerating the years here because it might take longer. But let's imagine that in the first case, where we're giving them money directly for the program, they might say it takes us X years or 2 years. In this particular case, they'll tell us it takes us 5 years to do that. But because the money that we're using for us is now I'm going to spend on myself because I need that. And the goals will take 5 years. Or they might tell us, listen, we have another funding from someone else, so we can get funding from someone else for this particular program. And it'll still take us only 2 years. And your money will help us to make sure that we achieve those 2 years in a very measurable and tangible way. So that can also be something. So it's not like these organizations are taking the money, spending on themselves, and they're not working on a problem. They are still continuously working on problems. So we still make sure. So we still make, between giving money to Jogin and Sanjana, we make sure that the way we decide when we give the money to you is you still should be having a program or work that you're working on that still appeals to us. It's just that we are asking you to spend money on yourself, but that core of your work should not, be distracted. It should not be abandoned.
Yeah, agree. And go ahead. Finish it up.
No. So I was just saying. So we do go with the outcomes. We still track the outcomes. We still have the the outcomes that are measured, that are being put out there. And what we do though in the unrestricted funding is we provide them much more hands-on help than we do in program funding. In unrestricted funding, like, we provide them a lot of hands-on help because we realize that they're struggling with it because they're not. Most of these organizations are structured to work on programs. They're not structured to help themselves.
Very, very well said. I think that was a beautiful statement. So what we're saying is you can still do the same. You can still have the conversation about the eventual impact, but the program money goes towards capacity building, which can then enable them to get the eventual impact. So the eventual impact can still be measured. It's just our money is not directly going into line items A, B, C, and D. That's what we need to.
Yeah, so we do that, and of course, in unrestricted funding, what happens is we also have additional outcomes. For example, another outcome we might have is creating strong ecosystem of implementing organizations in a sector. So we also measure the strength of an organization, which we don't in the previous case, right? So one of the goals we have is that by providing unrestricted funding, we are creating a strong foundation for this particular organization. So we also do that measurement.
Okay, got it. Okay, and tell us, I mean, I know there are some cases where you give money which even goes as direct cash transfers to the final beneficiary. So that's not funding, that is essentially just providing money. How does that work?
We don't do that.
Okay, so then
we don't do that because for us, exactly for that reason. Because see, I mean, it's very strict. We're still governed by regulations, right? Because giving money, unless it's even if it's free money, we don't necessarily structure a program like that. You know, so we're very particular that when organizations do their work, and the way we support them is, we give them grants, and then the grants can, are used in different ways. If at all they're giving money to these individuals, first of all, it has to be, even in that point, it has to be unrestricted funding in a way, because the money that, let's say, Seva is giving to someone to support them cannot have any strings attached or cannot have any causes attached to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Because the moment it does, it doesn't become grant. It becomes and then because it's violation of the the rules and regulations. Because our money is grant. We're not giving debt. We're not giving equity through these things. So which means even the people that we support cannot give grants and debt using our money. Yeah. So they can do that with their separate money. They can use their own money for doing that, right? But we cannot do that ourselves because at the end of the day, we are still regulated by the foreign. See, our money that we give is all it's all USD. It's all foreign money. It's not Indian money, right? So there's a lot of restrictions that we got to follow, which we're very, very particular about on how they're being followed.
I got it. I didn't appreciate it. Thanks. This was helpful. I'll ask one more question, then I open it up for other questions that are coming up on the chat, which is your for-profit investments in the social sector where there are for-profit investments. What's the balance between the two? And do you have, because we've come across organizations which have a for-profit wing and a not-for-profit wing, right? And sometimes we are confused. Because we are at SVP, we generally fund not-for-profit. So we're sometimes confused whether the not-for-profit how is the balance between the not-for-profit and the profit? And there are some doubts, especially when we are giving grants, whether that is somehow ending up enabling the for-profit to move ahead, which is great up to a point, and then you see the whole Pandora's box.
No, it's a very good question. Just give me a second, please.
Yeah, no problem.
So just please post your questions in the chat.
Okay, so that's a good question. See, there's a lot of, it's going to be a long answer just so that you appreciate where this is coming from. See, again, just remind me, because I think people, sometimes it's difficult to get your head around the different kinds of organizations. See, we are a funding organization, right? And our funding is completely based on, and I don't say this arrogantly, it's completely based on our money. And the way it's basically it's an endowment we have, right? And just to give you a little history of this, in the early 1940s or something, Henry Ford decided that the money that he made, he wants to give it away to this thing. So Henry Ford started this in the 1930s or 40s or whatever it is in the US that he started this. And then what he decided, and he had the foresight also in the 1950s or 60s, He said, I want nothing to do with this. I want this to be completely managed on your own. So what he did was he sold all of his shares and he said, I want nothing to do with it. So since then, we've been a completely private organization with nothing to do with the Ford family. We have zero, like no one, nothing to do with the Ford family. Ford has had no stake in it. No, so they had the foresight back then to make it independent. So then whoever the leaders were of Ford then decided is, listen, we have this pool of money. We want to be a perpetual giving organization. So that was a strategic investment. So to be a perpetual organization, what they decided was we'll take X percentage of this money and invest it in the public market or something to get returns. And then whatever profit we get out of it, we'll keep giving it so that we don't have to depend on anyone else. So from then till now, we just have an endowment that we've been growing. So which means a huge, we have a very professional investing organization within the foundation, whose only job is to increase the endowment, right? Just like Harvard, or just like any of these large institutions, they do professional investments, nothing to do with whatever. Of course, those professional investments also have ESG and all those other things that we use as criteria. But fortunately for us, knock on wood, they've been successful in growing it to a big pot. This is public knowledge, which is why I'm sharing. So our endowment now is as huge as $15 billion. Right? So that's the size of our endowment. And we've been using, and then what we do is the US laws say that you can only use X percentage of your endowment to give it, for us to give the tax status and all, you can only use X percentage of the endowment. We use that, we take X percentage and we give it away globally every year, right? And we keep growing the endowment. Now this money that we've been giving away is grant. We just basically write it off, saying we do it. We go back, every year we get some. So one arm of our organization is only creating money. The majority of the organization is giving away money, right? That's what we're doing, right? So now what happened is a couple of years ago, we decided, this is pretty new. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we said, wait a minute, like by US laws, it says that X percentage of our endowment can be used every year to give away for free. But there is nothing that prevents us, and that X percentage is very strictly governed. Like you can only take X percentage, give it away for free. But there's nothing that says how we can invest the remaining percentage. But the remaining percentage, like I said, we've been aggressively investing to, hopefully beat the market and get returns. But we said, what if we take a small percentage of the remaining percent and use that also for investing, but use that for investing risk, taking some risks. So we took a small amount of that. We put aside $1 billion from that. And we said, what if we take $1 billion and just invest it in equity and debt, but invested taking a little bit more risk than we would take in the endowment investing. Again, with the intent to get commercial returns, but saying that we're willing to take a few more risks in this, right? So, which is what we did. So this is pretty new. It's only about 4 or 5 years we've done this. And then the easiest approach for us, because we were new to this, is that rather than investing as VCs in which we go and find companies and invest in them, because we need to build our capacity in that, maybe an easier route for us is to be a fund of funds. So what we started doing with that money is basically investing in funds, right? So we are the LPs basically in a lot of funds, where we go and say, here's the money, we are going to be the LP, take this money, and we invest in LPs, right? I mean, we invest in GPs as LPs, which is what we've been doing for the last couple of years. So that is the way we do, that's what we mean by for-profit. It's very different from the way you're looking at for-profits and non-profits, because we completely agree. For us, it's not at all, neither one of us is for a profit, actually speaking, because it's our money, we're putting it in, we're deciding what we want, we're deciding how we want the returns. And again, I don't mean this arrogantly, but we're not answerable to anyone else except ourselves, right? Because we suffer both the upsides and the downsides. We are the only ones who want to live with it, right? Now, interestingly to your question, because I think what your question was asking is very important. We do come across a lot of social ventures and organizations that have a social arm, for-profit arm, and non-profit. And we ask the exact same questions that you do. We'd like to understand what is the intention of these organizations, which is why, like I said, for us, the due diligence, people don't appreciate this. The due diligence that we do is incredibly complex and complicated. We do a due diligence that is as good, if not better, I would say, than what a VC does for investing in this thing. For us, the due diligence part is very important. We like to understand the strengths of the organization, the people behind it. What is your ultimate goal? Why did you do this? Tell me how you'll measure your impact. Tell me the record of your employees. I'd like to speak to your customers. Everything. We do all of that. It takes us a very long time to approve and do a grant. It's a very long time. It is not the size of the grant that decides. We will do the same due diligence for a 1 crore grant as we would do for a 5 crore grant, as we would do for a 50 lakh grant. No compromise. Our financial, due diligence is very, very tough. Our regulatory due diligence is very, very tough. We are very strict in that. What we then do is, though, once we give the money to Jogin, we're a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah, agreed. So all the work happens upfront, so that this whole question about whether, I mean, we've had all of these conversations of whether this not-for-profit is an arm which is ultimately subsidizing the for-profit and so on and so forth, and that all has been going. So what you're saying is, once you go in, but there is a lot of diligence to make sure that there is a connection where money is incidental, but the impact is more important, and that's how. So again, coming back to like a full circle to when you said, bet on the leader, bet on the organization and the team, and just like venture capital, right, which is what we people do in VC, they bet on the team, and once we bet on the team, then all other questions don't matter. But if you don't have confidence in the team, all of these questions keep coming up and up and up. So yeah, agree. I will have one last. Actually, there are too many questions. So what I'll do is I'll shift to questions from the team. Not necessarily in that order. One question that has come is that governments across the world are increasingly antagonistic to organizations that raise equity and justice issues. And how do you? There are two questions. One is how does Ford deal with this in India, US? These are two examples. And can we understand the size and scale of Ford globally as well as in India?
Sure. See, we've like any other organization, we've had a interesting relationship with the government, and I think it's and I don't mean this with any specific government, any specific regime or whatever. That's the nature of work that all organizations, even private sectors, you've got to go through. So and our approach has always been the same. Our approach has been that we're not here against any organizations, against any ideologies or whatever. We don't. In fact, one of the things. So just to give you an appreciation of this, let me just go back to 3 years back, and please bear with me when I give you a little background of the situation that I walked into in India to give you an appreciation of this. So like I was saying, I was in US, and my previous job before this was working with a gentleman called Paul Volcker. For those of you in the finance sector, he used to be the Federal Reserve Chairman in the US for a very long time, worked for 5 US presidents, so on and so forth. And his investment rules are still used in the Wall Street Volcker rule and all of that. So I used to work for him in the finance, doing a lot of stuff in Wall Street, actually in US of all places before this. And then, Ford Foundation, which was always been here, like I said, almost like a quote unquote blue-eyed girl or boy of India for a very long time, all of a sudden found itself in a spot, right? For the first time in its history, it was accounts were frozen. It was in a watch list, so to say. A lot of attention, scrutiny, debates, national debates about Ford, people speaking for, against, all kinds of attention, right? Which Ford was not prepared for, right? It was just not prepared for it, right? It's a question of, wait a minute, where did this come from? Because, thinking we've always been doing, helping the country, we've been doing good things in the country, where did this come from, right? Complete shock and complete denial. But long story short, my predecessor was asked to leave the country by the government of India. It came to as serious as that. Everything locked down, like I said. Our campus locked down. For those of you who've been to our campus, we're in a very beautiful campus here in Delhi, Lodi Gardens. Next to Lodi Gardens, a huge thing right next to IIC, the UN campus actually. We've been there for a long time. Everything was shut down. So that's the Ford Foundation I walked into, which is when Narayan Murthy, like I said, called me and said, "Hey, I got an interesting opportunity for you. Would you like to come to India for an exciting job?" I know Narayan Murthy since a long time. So, I said yes. As long as I get the freedom to do what I think is important to fix this, it's good enough. Which is, why I took this opportunity. So I came to a Ford Foundation, which was there. Just to give you some perspective. So all I was doing the first 1.5 years primarily was to go around and meet everyone, right? Every person, good, bad, whatever, friends, not friends of Ford, young, new. I was just doing this so-called listening tour for almost 1.5 years, meeting everyone, government, just go there and without any agenda, just to say, hey, what do you think, Ford can do? Do you think Ford is, in fact, I asked them a very difficult question. I asked them, do you think Ford should even be in India? A very difficult question. And I didn't have any opinion. This was not a leading question. I just asked them, what do you think? Should 4D be in India? Right? And you know, it was very interesting that every one of them, and when I mean everyone, 100% of them. And I'm talking about right from, I started with, before even coming to India, my first meeting in the US was with the India ambassador to US. First meeting, right? Because it was the top of mind for everyone, right? Because Ford was in the news then. This was very high level because the governments had got involved. In fact, when the WikiLeaks came out, they realized that Secretary Hillary Clinton had actually written directly to the Prime Minister of India. You know, that's a WikiLeaks. That's how high level this whole issue was, right? Because it's a very old, prestigious organization for the US also. So it was so I started my conversations with the US ambassador, India ambassador, to all the way here, and every single one of them, yes, different people had different ways of telling me this. Some of them are very preachy, some of them are very rude, some of them are very, whatever, the nature of how these conversations can go. But every single one of them told me, we should be here. We should not leave. Every single one of them said, you should not leave. Because they all had their own visions of what we should be doing in India. Because my next two questions were, what do you think we should be doing? How do you think we should be doing this? And they all gave their own laundry list of do this, don't do this, do that, whatever. But that was just their excitement of saying do this. But for me, that was a very important exercise, because I realized that everyone appreciates the role of organizations like ours. Everyone appreciates the need for organizations like ours. And the important thing is to decide what is that role, which is why I started off by saying, see, I'm not foolish to say that I will replace or I will do the job that private sector is not doing because, whatever reasons, or I cannot replace that. I cannot replace capital. I cannot replace policy. I cannot replace scale. These are things that I cannot replace. So whenever anyone says that, I get scared. When people say that, oh, I'm going to do this. And when people ask questions about scale, I get very scared because I'm not a big fan of scale at all. Because I believe that only I believe that no one can scale like government. No one. Even the private sector is foolish if it thinks that it can provide the kind of scale that a government cannot. But I like words like replication and all, because replication indicates something very different from scale. Replication indicates that you need to get something right and you need to get a mold before you can replicate it, right? And for me, that is interesting. How do you get that mold, right? A mold leads to replication, not necessarily scale. And for me, I realized those are the things that organizations like ours are perfectly suited to do. Because to create a mold takes a lot of time sometimes, takes a lot of failure, takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of money that you're willing to wash down the drain, right? Before you get that perfect mold. And I said that for us is a sweet spot. So we can do something that no one else is willing to do because they don't have that, like for a government, let me tell you why it is difficult to do, invest in patience. And this thing is because whether you like it or not, they have a very fixed cycle of elections and, whatever and all that doesn't afford them the luxury of time. It's people are very impatient when it comes to government, right? They want to see something today and right now. So we realize, but we can do that. So to give you examples, we've been working with a lot of state governments. So Gujarat, 2 or 3 years ago, when they were in the thick of crop insurance, which Prime Minister Modi had rolled out, they were struggling with crop insurance because crop insurance, even though intention was good, how do you sell crop insurance to a farmer who has no clue what a premium means, right? A farmer is saying, why do I pay money every month when nothing comes back to me? For the farmer, this is very odd. Like, what is premium? Like, many of us don't understand what premiums are, right? Why do you pay premiums every month when I don't get something? So farmers are struggling with this, and government is not in a position to spend time with farmers, educating them, holding their hands to explain to them what premium is. The government's role was to create a policy, create a very clear policy, put the enabling mechanisms in place, and hopefully, hope that this crop insurance picks up in Gujarat. But they were not in a position to do that. Then the insurance companies in Gujarat that were all behind this were all willing to put out the products, but they were also not willing to, they put out all these products and they were saying, we don't understand why these products are not being taken up by the farmers because we have done everything that the government told us to do. So just to give you an example, so we found, for example, that's exactly what we can do. So we stepped, and the government invited us, we stepped in there, we brought all these parties to the table. We worked with those organizations on the ground who have been working with farmers for 40 years, 50 years on the ground in Gujarat, who have that trust of the farmers, who understand how to speak the farmers' accent, right? And we worked with those organizations. Brought all these farmers together to understand what is it, how do we increase the uptake of this. So we had the same intention that the government had, but we were approaching it from a very different perspective. Because sometimes to address that, we realized that, oh, first you got to do something else, and then you got to do something else, and on top of that, you got to do something else. Only then will the uptake of insurance, increase. So that's just a good example. So I guess for us, those are the kind of things that we've been doing. Now, the other part of your question about the size of Ford. See, Ford used to be, like I said, 800 people in India. We're no longer that. We're about 30, close to 40 people. We're still the largest office outside the US, believe it or not. And we have 10 other offices. We have offices in and all based on region. So even though it's centered in one place, like in India, it's centered in India, but we do a region which we now restricted only to Nepal and Sri Lanka, because we used to have Bangladesh and all before. I also do some work in Bhutan, but honestly, the scale of issues in India hardly even gives me the opportunity to work in Nepal or Sri Lanka, leave alone Bhutan, but then we have an office in China, very interestingly. It's also been there since the 1960s that my colleague heads and does work in China and the neighboring regions, which for us has been a very, very interesting experience working in China, as you can imagine, on these issues. I mean, India is one of the easiest regions for us to work in, really, compared to the other regions we work in. We work in the Middle East, we work in Egypt. So imagine the kind of work we're doing in Egypt and the surrounding countries. We work in Egypt. We work in, these are the offices. So Egypt takes care of the Middle East. Indonesia takes care of Southeast Asia. We work in East Africa out of Kenya, West Africa out of Nigeria, North Africa out of Egypt, South Africa out of South Africa. And then we work in South America out of Brazil, and then Latin America and Central America out of Mexico and Colombia. And then US, of course. Because US,
this is fantastic.
US is not,
of course.
Yeah. No, I was going to say US is not immune to any of these issues, by the way. We always worked in US.
I'm sure. Whatever you just said, and we're trying to replay the conversations that we've had in SVP, and we use the word scale quite a bit, because that's the language that we come from. We're actually also doing the same thing that you said, which is getting the mold right and replicating, and then that leads to everything else. So this is fantastic for us. I have to now just one last question, and then we'll close this because we don't have time. The crisis has created an environment where most people want that they are. That's the amount of impact that they can create.
I'm sorry, you're breaking. I don't know if it's my connection but you're breaking actually.
Jogan, you have to repeat yourself. We couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. So what I'm saying is, in the current context of COVID, there are many donors and corporates who are putting their money only in the large NGOs, in the sense that the NGOs feel a significant amount of pain. Is there any, does Ford Foundation take an approach where it funds some small, some large, and all of that, or what's the approach, especially in the current crisis? This is my last question.
So that's a very, very, very good question, because again, see, when I speak about some of these things, just I want you to please remember that these are my approaches in the last 3 years. So not necessarily, I don't want to speak for the entire foundation, right? So please don't quote me that the entire foundation is doing these approaches. This is what I, since I've been in India for the last 3 years, have decided to do, right? So these are my responses on what in this region we're doing. So absolutely. So I was very concerned when I came 3 years ago that that many foundations like ours sometimes do tend to favor some of these, in our world, and these are I'm sure languages that we all can also appreciate. They call donor darlings, right? Somehow they're very savvy. They always attract donor money. It's striking how they're always people always know them, and I can name quite a few of them. I'm sure if I name them, you'll also remember them, because you're like, yeah, I know them. But I've always had a concern since I joined, because when we looked at our history, also yes, we have helped create a lot of great organizations, but then we also had a tendency to go to the usual suspects, and it's very natural, right? For those of you active in the investing. By the way, like I said, we're still active in investing. So for me, it's amazing that I get to look at both of these parallelly, because we also do VC, equity and debt investment. So I can compare this, and it's amazing how, striking and similar these things are, right? Because in the investment world, we have a lot of the investors suffer from FOMO, right? It's a very common thing in investing. So this thing, everyone is like, so like the moment Sachin, Bansal starts something and someone goes and invests, Sequoia goes and invests, everyone else is like, wait a minute, I should also invest, because you have a fear of missing out, right? Everyone does the same thing, right? And so there's a huge FOMO in that sector. And in this sector, the same thing is, it's not necessarily FOMO. It's here it is. Like we say, they're the darlings of the donor sector, because either they're very savvy, either because they speak English very well, or they speak Hindi really well. They're very articulate. They're always on panel discussions. They're very presentable, blah, blah, blah. I'm super concerned. I'm super concerned with this. So let me tell you that I'm super concerned. And, we tried different approaches. In the first year, we said, we are only as good as the people who actually, we got a team of specialists who do the due diligence and who make the investments. I got the really easy job of just leading the organization. The really tough work is done by, those in my team who do all the due diligence, who actually are the ones who write the check in a way, and, and then who work with these organizations. And I realized that they also had biases. They also have this comfort zone of, because they don't want to go wrong with their investments, right? So they take the easy path of, I really like Jogin. He's very popular. Everyone knows him, and he has a very good track record. So let me invest with what Jogin is doing, right? Because I feel, or let me invest in an organization that Jogin is recommending. So it was very difficult for me, in spite of all these conversations with my team, to convince my team to get out of that comfort zone. So in the first year, we tried this approach of, hey guys, we got to really go out. Let's intentionally have these meetings in which we don't invite Jogin. We invite, in fact, invite the others who we have in. Let's go out in the field more. Let's not sit only in Delhi and Mumbai. Let's go to the interiors of Jharkhand and all that. And I realized that only works in a certain way. Beyond a certain point, it still doesn't work. So then what we did last year is, we said, enough of this. Unless we have hard targets, we're not going to realize this. So last year, what we did is, we said, out of 100% of grant making, X percentage of grants every year has to be to new recipients. X percentage. We put a very hard target. So we put a very high number, and we said X percentage of this has to go to people we have not given money to, right? And then we put another percentage and said, X percentage of this has to go to women-led organizations, and then whatever. We put all those criteria in paper, because we realized that it's one thing to have a good intention, right? And it's another thing to actually make that intention come true. So, we put these hard numbers, because even though you might think, wait a minute, we are in the field of doing good, right? I mean, for someone like us, you would think, but how can it go wrong? You guys are anyway in the field of doing good. But I'm very concerned about going to the same people. What I've told these people, and see what I've told, because I was a new person coming into India, it made it easier for me to deliver these hard messages. So I went to these people who were used to getting these grants, and I told them, I'm sorry, but I might not be giving you grants in the future. And I don't care what you think about this, because you can imagine some of these people, for good or for bad, were almost feeling, I don't want to use the word entitled, because that's too strong a word, but felt that it cannot go wrong for them. That, so imagine coming and telling to Jogin, or imagine coming and telling to maybe someone like Bini Bansal and Sachi. But by the way, these are all people I know, so that's why I'm using their names also. Telling them, or Mukesh, like going and telling Mukesh now, who's doing his next, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you money. I'm sorry, we're just not going to do it, because that's not our principle. It's very tough, right? Because A, you're risking your reputation going bad. B, you're risking, Mukesh getting really pissed off and going and telling others, I don't know what these guys think of themselves, whatever. But we were willing to do that. And in the long term, it helped, because these people I was telling no to at the beginning, I had to tell them no to with a very solid reason. I couldn't tell them that I'm telling no because you keep getting money all the time. So I had, my reasons were very solid. It was about, how do we create an ecosystem of other players? How do we create an ecosystem of organizations based out of Jharkhand? How do we create, India? So for example, the people that I told to no in my first tranche were people based out of DC, and, like really large organizations like Carnegie and Brookings, and really large organizations who were doing work based on India, but were based out of US. I told them, I'm sorry, but I don't want to fund you guys anymore. So we were telling no to MIT and Harvard and all these organizations that were doing amazing work in India, amazing work, right? But I told them, we're not going to fund you anymore because I don't want to give money to Harvard and MIT anymore. I want to find, Ambedkar University in India. I want to find the smaller universities in India that also should be doing this work, but cannot do this work because they don't have this kind of funding. So I told them no. And some of these conversations are very, very tough because these are very renowned people. These are people who are getting these, and this is a real example because, obviously, the economic prize winner this year is a Ford grantee. I mean, he's a Ford chair in, very interestingly. And he's got supported from Ford a long time ago, but we told no to him this last couple of years, not because he was not doing great work, but I said by giving you money, we're not enabling an Indian academic center or an Indian institution to grow. So I guess in a way, what I'm saying is these are important conversations to have. You got to have metrics and you got to have it. You cannot shy away from it because you might become less popular. You might have this thing, but as long as you have a very strong fundamental reason for why you're saying no to them, I think you have to do it because we've realized that is one of the obligations we have is to create this ecosystem of these small ventures that in turn tomorrow will become big ventures, hopefully.
This is absolutely fascinating, Pradeep. I mean, we've reached the end of this. I've got 3 or 4 questions, but thank you so much for taking the time. We've learned a lot. I personally have learned a lot, and if beyond learning, a few pieces fall into place of what we are already doing before. And how to orient that based on the experience of Ford Foundation. So thank you for taking the time from all of us. We really, really appreciate it, and we wish we will continue having these dialogues in the future. One of the things that we also want to do is get out of the silo that we are in, so that we start learning about it. And this was an important step for us. Thanks so much from all of us. I'll shift to 15 minutes of updates from SVP. We do hope you stay while that's going on, and I will start with KG. There are about 4 or 5 slides, so we should be able to finish this off fairly fast.
So thank you, Jogin. Excuse me. I'm happy to stay, but I got to log off at 10 o'clock just to let you know.
That's okay. Thanks a lot once again. KG, I'm giving this over to you for a quick grants update. We have 4 or 5 basic spotlight slides for the team.
Thank you, Jogin. I hope.
So go ahead, Pradeep.
Yeah.
KG.
Good morning, everyone, and
yes,
welcome, especially to the new partners. I thought I'll give you a few minutes update on what the grants committee is doing. It's a committee which we reconstituted recently, as 6 members. Anjana, Pradeep, Revati, Shantaraju, Suraj, and I act as the chair, right? And let me say that the way we see is the primary role of the GC is not just to make grants, but to ensure value out of the grants we make, and value to the funds, value to the time the partners bring in, and other resources that the partners are committing. That's the way we see it. And we try to achieve that through putting in a very rigorous and objective process. That's very important. No, it's not about writing a check or giving a recommendation to pay. This involves studying the proposals of the NGO with the LPs, NGOs, and we look at it from various angles, like what is the impact of the proposal on our livelihood team and the other civic teams we got? What is the rigor and robustness of the plans? What is the clarity and the sense of purpose they are bringing to the table? How sharp is the proposal? How achievable are the deliverables and milestones? What is the track record of the NGO? And what is the governance drive they have, right? And we also look at what's the commitment of our own lead partners to the cause, and that gives us great sense of comfort, right? Because we would like to see our lead partners see the program through. We are also looking at, out of this proposal, will there be a model which is emerging, which as Pradeep said, is replicable or scalable in our own language. That we look at it very, very closely. And we also look at, out of the grant, do we get any opportunity for capacity building? It's not about achieving some livelihood numbers, but are we able to contribute and build some capacity which will be with them? So these are several things we look at. And this is an iterative process. We look at it, make some suggestions, observations, we go back, come back, rework on it. So that happens before we finally say, good, we got it, they are happy, and we make the grant. I think that's something I want to upfront say that that's the rigor we are trying to use. So it's not just about monetary value, but building capacity, involving a wider network of partners, strengthening our NGO partner ecosystem, and collaboration, learning from others' experience, and all that. And all that proposals, discussions, etc., are all in a drive, Google Drive, so that there is a transparency to the whole process, right? That's what we do. And just to give an update of where we are this year, we have about $1.5 crore to give us grants, which includes some CSR funding, which we are able to track and tap and get. So right now, as of today, we have concluded on 2 grants. We have given a grant to the Youth for Jobs. Basically, they are coming to build a Campus Connect program in Bangalore, targeted at the persons with disabilities, to bring them and give them a level playing ground, so that they can learn and then they can compete with others to get a good job. So that's a program which we are supporting, and they are looking at us beyond the grant to give them connects, leveraging our network and connect with the corporates in Bangalore. And once successful, we are sure that they will be able to move on, and we are just create a first model. The other grant we have concluded is to an organization called Justice in Care. It's about a 14 lakh grant. It is for the vulnerable trafficked women victims who are in shelters, to give them some basic skills depending on their aptitude and help them to get a job. This also involves developing a model to work in this sensitive area, and also convergence of various stakeholders involved in it. And we hope that our grant goes beyond just giving a livelihood, but creating a template model which we can be replicated more and more as we go along. We are considering currently actively a grant to A3. This is to support the tribals tap into the lantana wood growing in the forest area to make articles of use and create a livelihood. So there are certain suggestions and discussions we are having, and we are trying to see how this proposal can be sharply tuned in such a way that it is sustainable and replicatable, and we will take a call on it as we go along. These are some of the things we have done and in the pipeline. Overall, it's quite an active committee and enhancing and engaging in trying to enhance value for the partners. What do you, Jogin? Thank you.
Thank you, KG. And I have to commend you and the entire GC. I have not attended any of these, which is because you're the chair, but the amount of sheer work and brain power that has gone in making these commitments is incredible. I've seen this process going on over the last 8 weeks now, and you've brought a fantastic amount of focus on this. So thanks a lot for your leadership on this.
Quick, Sridhar, one comment, Sridhar from Titan. KG and team is an excellent work, and I would wear my hat as a CSR head of Titan, and I would shamelessly want to copy this process and enhance my own company's process of due diligence and grant making. I hope it's okay with the permission of SVP. Chair.
Of course, go for it.
Yep.
Go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. So 2 spotlights, Anjana. Anjana, if you could just spend a little bit of time, a few minutes on the Crafting Futures work that is going on. There's a letter of appreciation and everything that has come in, but can you just spend a little bit of time on what has gone on in Crafting Futures for the COVID-19 work?
Sure, Jogin, thanks. Hi, everybody. So I think we had a short update in the last partners meet as well. So Crafting Futures was one organization that we were supporting. Last year, they finished the project that we were supporting closed in January, I think. And subsequently, we were working with them to develop the next stage proposal. And in between, this COVID crisis came in. So they very quickly, they very quickly repurposed their capacity and brought in, shifted focus and started using their connects with tailors who had lost, lost their jobs or had cancelled orders, but had a lot of fabric available and started making masks. And even during a very severe lockdown, were able to create systems for, having material moved, having the mask, stitched mask come get packed and then delivered to users who had ordered these masks. So till date, they have delivered about 150,000 cotton masks. They've helped about 75 tailors to earn a livelihood during this lockdown period. They have, of course, a lot of these mask orders are from individuals, so they handle even small orders like 5 masks and 10 masks. And at the other end of the spectrum, they've handled orders from corporates for 30,000, 40,000 masks as well. One really, I think something that they're really proud of is having built masks and PPEs for the Bangalore Police Department, which was at that time in really dire need because all the policemen were out and they didn't have protective gear. So that was something that SVP and FICCI Flow funded to provide 10,000 masks and about 800 or 900 PPE kits for the policemen who are patrolling the streets in Bangalore. And then very recently, once the migrant Shramik trains started and then the workers were going home, there was a individual initiative which raised some funds through crowdfunding to provide COVID care kits for these travelers. And they reached out to Crafting Futures to supply the masks. And that was also like a 24-hour notice. They were able to supply about 4,500 odd masks for these travelers to, for distribution to these travelers. So that's kind of what's been going on with them, and we're meeting them. I mean, talking to them on a regular basis to try and see how to move this forward and continue this effort, either whether it is in terms of mask creation or other kinds of initiatives that in this short-term period will continue to help create livelihoods.
This is fantastic, Anjana. Thanks so much for your leadership. And again, one of the insights that we can keep continuing to have from all of these examples, again, with the next example also saying the same thing, which is what works is when there is a leadership team at a foundation which is proactive, which wants to work with us, and a leader from our side who is a superstar. So that brings us to Sashi. Sashi, maybe if you could go through some highlights. Some of it is already on here, but if you could go through your personal experience with OBLF, which is amazingly enough only one of several things that you're doing. So over to you, Sashi, for a small update.
Okay, this is impromptu. I didn't know this was coming. In any case, OBLF was introduced to us by Sanjana. I think Sanjana referred Prison Engineer as the anchor who brought this lead to us. They have been working for the last 10 years, and the model is very nice that they involve community workers to get trained to be primary school teachers. So we are not looking at attrition, and we are looking at employment and education hand in hand. So they worked in the Anikal area, working with 80 odd schools now. But what was more impressive is how they gathered, Pradeep spoke about galvanizing. So under COVID relief, they quickly got a team galvanized together, came together, rallied around their idea. And they have managed to distribute 55 metric tons of dry ration to migrant communities in Bangalore. 20,000 face masks, 5,000 hand sanitizers. But beyond this, they also, when they went to talk to people and give the dry rations, they understood that there were cattle which didn't have fodder, which couldn't go out to graze. So they started giving cattle feed. They started giving, bringing in food for the dogs. And the care went from people to animals in many areas, including, poultry farms got some supply from them as well. And now they are into the safety and hygiene sessions in 12 panchayats, again, involving community workers such as Asha, the panchayat head and everybody, so that their buy-in is there and they will follow through on the instructions given. They've also been supplying PPE kits. They have taken special care of PK workers. Some of these invisible workers, even on other days, have become even more invisible and taken for granted. I mean, they are handling our waste, whether it is COVID-19 positive waste or negative waste, without any clue of what they're handling. So they've been giving a lot of awareness as well as giving them gloves and PPE kits, which I think is very, very necessary at this point in time. What they do with their school program, which is community support, seems to be a very unique model. So they have given a draft proposal 4 weeks ago. But because of this COVID relief work, they couldn't put it in SVP template. So I've asked them to come back. So hopefully grants committee will see in a couple of weeks a proposal coming from them for the education, with a lot of innovation into it, given post-COVID situation is a little different from what they have, they're used to. Over to you, Jogin.
Thank you, Shashi. And one of the things that one needs to mention is all of this is without us having invested any money in them. So this is just, so I remember, I think Farzan sent some note to me, which went to Sanjana, which now transformed into this beautiful collaboration that you're seeing on the screen. And this is one more example of the fact that a lot of the work that we do does not involve a lot of money, because we're able to help them and herd them through various hurdles as we take them forward. So look forward to that. So last point I had, guys, because we're nearing the end, is that we're typically one would do goals, etc. in the April-May period. In the April-May period, people were a little bit busy with all the COVID stuff. So we and the CMC, we work together, and this is still not final because this is for inputs, and Chakra and Sanjana are also discussing. Chakra is the incoming chair, as you know, so it's he has to then take a call on the next year's goals. But these are a few things that we thought of as some proposals, and anybody who has any feedback, obviously please send it off to myself as well as Chakra. So the first thing we thought of is resilience, which is that we have so far not had a structured event where our NGOs can talk to each other. Each of our NGOs is in their own silo, and they continue to be in their own silo, and we have to break that silo. One of the biggest things I believe what we need to do is to break that silo. That itself will unlock a lot of potential. So we wanted to have a very specific focus on that. How do we create events where the first event may be just all NGOs, all of our 18 odd partners sitting on presenting their work, and then see how it develops from there. But with a goal to create that interdependence. A perfect example, I have overused it, but I will still use it again, where A3 reached out to APD for creation of some corporate gifting materials that they needed. So now there is this interdependence that comes. And I'm sure there is a lot of other interdependence that comes. We do need to keep adding partners. We have 3 partners who are coming on now. I have to I completely forgot, but I have to mention this right now, is that we have a renewal cycle, which is now April and May for everybody who renewed last time until October. And I'm extremely happy to report that every single renewal is coming through. Every single. There's not a single person who has dropped out. So that's great. That's a final proof of the pudding of the fact that we're doing some good work. There's a lot of CSR engagements that are happening. There is one more engagement that will happen. I and Ravi did a partner recruitment session 10 days back. Out of it, we got one new CSR head who said they were also looking to engage, because I think the important thing is for us to get a network. I use the words network and resilience too often, but I think they are important because we need to create the whole network that can enable this resilience. Chakra and Sanjana are still working on engagement metrics, because that's something that is very important, and it will be a combination of turnovers and signups and all of that. And we do need large scale, beyond the first event, which is an internal event for our NGOs, we need some outreach, like we did WasteX. There is some significant work going on with A3 for a fairly significant lake event, which is going to get all the stakeholders together. And there is a lot of work Padma Shri and the whole solid waste management group has been running away with. You saw the updates on Madhiwala and how she's used a very, very, very small amount of money that has been given to create something that is much, much bigger than what we're doing. So again, that's the mode we are in, which is creating, going and finding NGOs with good leadership, pairing them up with good lead partners that we have in SVP, finding the funds for them internally or externally to create POCs, which Pradeep called the mold, and then using that mold to replicate. And that's the mold that we need to replicate more and more. We've got some examples of that. Like, for example, Youth for Jobs, the one that we're supporting here, is a mold that was created in Hyderabad. While Mitti, which we created here, is a mold that is supported now by Delhi. And I think Hyderabad is also looking at it. Hyderabad has also looked at funding. Vritti as well as Swasti have been funded by Hyderabad. So all of these molds become building blocks for the long-term impact that we need to create. Some of the molds are also philanthropy molds for partners. For example, Exhibit A is myself. When I came into SVP, I had no idea about what philanthropy is. And now after 5 or 6 years, I know what philanthropy is, how to move this forward and all. That's also a mold that we need to focus on as well, which is the partner mold. So these are the several things we're doing. There's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of opportunity to contribute. There are about 18 projects going on, which are running well. So anybody who has, once again, I will say, anybody who has any, who feels that they have not directly connected, please reach out to Sanjana, or I will be happy to do that. And as I said, these are chapter goals. So anybody who has any other comments, questions right now, you're welcome to do that, or send it to me or Sanjana. So I'm going to stop here and say, open it out for everybody. Sridhar, go ahead. I can
Quick 2 comments. It'll take 30 seconds. Comment number 1, at Titan, the experience we have been every alternate year having our own NGO partner meet. We can share on how it works, what we do. What actually the biggest thing what has happened is inter-NGO collaboration. There are many examples which has worked out of it, absolutely at zero cost. So that we have done 2 years since, every alternate year we do. That's one. Second is, Sanjana, I think last year when we had the new partner meet, there were at least 3 or 4 whom I had met and participated. I think one I sent back to you, the CSR head of Bosch. He had shown some interest in something. I think there are 3-4 leads which I can help to pursue. In the sense.
Yeah, that's right. I'm pitching to him as well.
Yeah, there are 3 or 4 who attended, I recall. One from there, one from Tata Coffee, one from Tata Global Beverages. Now it's called Tata Consumer Products. He was keen to participate, but he had something very urgent, pressing. So there are about 5 of them. I will connect them, and then we can actually, whatever. Let's figure out.
Lead this, Sridhar, and we get more of the network together.
Not an issue. Not an issue. About 5 of them, we will try to. Let's do the first intro. Whatever. Okay.
And we'll take your learnings from whatever your networking events are, and then conduct
sure.
them.
Sure.
Great. I'm opening it up for anybody else. This is, sorry, I had one more slide I didn't realize. Which is the APD catalog of plants. This has been available online. It is Sanjana has sent several links.
No, not yet. I will be sending it. I'm making the catalog today, tomorrow. So then.
Okay, I got it. So you'll send it to the group. And Sanjana, can you be a little bit more specific on the last one? Tech support to help take the training program.
Yeah. So a lot of our like Youth for Jobs, etc., are thinking about ways to retool their employees or reskill them, and are figuring out things like Zoom. Costs around, should I have host on Amazon cloud? So if you have any intelligence on what's the best way to help your employees go online, software they should use, or a template they can follow, just share that with me, and I'll be happy to send it.
Thank you. And the last thing, there is a request that's coming from Padma Shri, and we'll end in the next 3 minutes, guys. I know we're running a little over time, which is she needs somebody who is an expert to talk on teamwork, preferably in Kannada or Telugu, at the Madhiwala market, because there is a lot of non-coordination between PKs and supervisors. So that's an ask that is going on from here. If there's anybody who can do a teamwork session in Kannada or Telugu, please let Sanjana or Padma Shri know. Right. Any other last things we've got? I'll keep this open for 120 more seconds for anybody else to, or less. Okay. So thank you everybody. As always, this was a fantastic session. Pradeep, if you're still on,
thanks for the recording.
Yes,
Yeah.
Ranjana, please send the recording to everybody.
Thank you all.
And thanks to everybody who's participated. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Sanjana, just put me on to Pradeep. Huh? We were aiming to.
Yeah, he's doing that at last time.
Pending from your side. Thank you. Bye. Good day, all of you.